Right, moving on to our first panel discussion of this evening, everybody. The electrification begins with EV infrastructure. Everyone's getting excited with the networking already. Hold your horses, hold your horses.
Well, that's what happens when you give them free drinks.
It is, that's what happens when you give people drinks. The networking starts far too early. Right, allow me to introduce our guests. We have Alex Gilbert on my far left, the Head of Energy and Electrification at Transport for London. Alex, as I said, currently Head of Energy and Electrification within Commercial Development at Transport for London, the world's most integrated transport authority and the capital's largest and most significant energy user. And on my left, we have Sara Sloman from PayThru. Sara has worked to deliver sustainable transport infrastructure projects for nearly 20 years, both in the private and public sector. Of course, their full biographies are on the app. If I read them all out, we would still be here for some time. So please welcome Alex and Sara. So our discussion is the electrification beginning with EV infrastructure. So what is the future for our cities? It's an enormous question and one that we will do our best to answer over the next few minutes. With an EV revolution comes all the requirements and infrastructure challenges and urban planning challenges to ensure public transport and privately owned commuting vehicles can coexist seamlessly. So how does an electrified nation ensure streamlined charging is available to absolutely everyone who needs it? And I appreciate that as a massive subject, so we're going to have to be fairly punchy with this one. But first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us at EV Magazine Live. But if we are planning a city with low emissions, efficient commuting in mind, how do we balance passenger vehicles, public transport, e-mobility? How do you balance the three?
I've always been a big fan of making sure there's space for everyone on the roads. So obviously I'm a big believer in fleet and ensuring that there's plenty of space for the fleet drivers and essential road users to move around. But you're only going to achieve that if you move single occupancy use vehicles off the road. So the way to do that is to offer them something else. And that's why I love sharing the stage with Alex, because he'll be able to talk about the public transport initiatives that happen around the world, but also in London where it begins most of the time. This museum is testament to that. We're innovators, we're disruptors, that's what we do. But it's more than that. It's about offering everyone access to that transport. So price equity, ability to pay seamlessly and easily with just one app or card. And that's what inspired me to join PayThru as their Chief Strategy Officer, because they've got a technology that can be applied to multi-modes, e-mobility across the board. But for now, we sit seamlessly behind the EV charging experience just to make it quicker and easier to access EV charging.
And Alex, I suppose if you can do it in London, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. London always has the extra challenges, but as said, and not in an arrogant way, most things do tend to get tested here and then sort of taken around the world, or in sort of Hong Kong, Singapore, and those areas as well. I think, obviously I agree with a lot of what Sara said, so I won't kind of repeat all of that. For me, the bit that gets really interesting as well is the whole challenge of public transport with EV and getting the balance. There'll probably be people in the room here that are sort of very pro-public transport. That means that then has to be, or you're anti-car, and you don't like cars, and the mayor's always accused of not liking cars and all of that. And it flips the other way, of course, as well, where people just sort of say your public transport just isn't working and it's not good enough and it isn't there yet. So what gets really, really interesting for the future of all of this is this kind of mobility as a service, but these kind of blurred lines of what will and won't be public transport going forward. And already we're beginning to see that. Many will have got here tonight by sort of stepping out, getting an app of one sort or another, and you look at all the different options available. And when you start bringing in things like micro-mobility, e-bikes, e-scooters, e-cargo bikes, you start thinking about demand-responsive transport. Is that public transport? If 10 people hire something and all jump in it together, it's still an EV, but you'd question it's got a bit more public. So those kind of blurred lines, which will be the future of the city, it's very complicated. It's just not as easy as it used to be, but it means there is a role for everyone, and it gives that the equity and accessibility that Sara's talking about as well.
But that transition period, because we are obviously in that transition period, how can that be managed to make sure no one loses out?
To go with that, it is challenging. I'd say there's a pretty good job made of that at the moment, in that you provide enough of public transport, of the full range of public transport, which again is often sort of labelled as bus and tube and whatever, but there are 17 different services that TfL runs. There you go, that's the plug for that. Probably work out how many you can see from here. But the full range of that, and making sure that we continue to increase bus routes and things like that, which obviously get electrified as well, but also bringing in micromobility, looking at fleets and logistics. So the whole suite together, which it is looked at, so you ensure that no one is left behind. And I don't think there are many that are, but it's then a case, obviously, of also supporting electrification and making sure everyone has access to that as well.
I think there's a balance between build it and they will come, or build it and shove them towards it, the carrot and stick principle. So we've seen huge surge in interest in micromobility and public transport as a direct result of clean air zones, which have all been born out of a very sad trigger, which is that a child did lose their life, and that garnered a lot of attention for the fact that clean air is the bigger picture here. So cities like London and others around the world have to trial these things, and to the sort of Joe public that looks like we're wasting money. Or I remember taking calls saying, why are you wasting all this money on cycle parking and bus lanes and EV charging? And then those calls became, why are you not spending more money on bus lanes and EV charging? And so I love the appetite. I love seeing people's behaviour change be triggered. And it takes a long time, probably a couple of years, between policy being written and adopted and rolled out to people seeing that as their normality.
There were some very knowing nods from you on the air there, Alex, about those answers.
Exactly. It always takes a lot longer than that in reality, right? And that's the job of policymakers, and I'm not one of them, but I've got huge respect for those people because it takes at least that. In reality, it's normally 5-10 years for those sort of the moans and groans to stop, and people go, oh, okay, that probably was quite a good idea then. Can we have more of that? And then they're moaning, and then you've got 5 years of building it out. So, yeah, it's always that long-term challenge.
Now, I do need to get back to my script occasionally, or I will get in trouble with the production team, because I've gone off a tangent. I do apologise. But Alex, what recommendations would you make if someone was procuring EV charging partners?
So, yeah, it's a nice question because we're sort of in the middle of this just at the moment. As some will be aware, we're building a joint venture for rapid charging hubs in London that several here have had a part of, or indeed directly been involved with. So we're right amongst this at the moment. Now, there isn't slow charging, fast charging and other types as well, but specifically on that, I think in the case, we've seen this market evolve rapidly. Right? There's a whole bunch of people in the room. There's probably a whole bunch of startups here. It's an incredibly active ecosystem. That's fantastic. The challenge obviously is, and certainly if you're a body like TfL, of finding a partner that you know will share the same values, they share long-term outlook. You know, we celebrated our 160th birthday the other day, so you're trying to find people that you think might, maybe, be around in, you know, maybe not 160, but at least 16. And there's going to be huge consolidation in this industry. And that's a big issue, finding the right people that are going to be around. Many will jump ship for good reason, right? Because someone will give them enough money and it's worth getting off the ship. But we're keen on that. But for us, the major driver is what we call SAI, but it's sustainability, accessibility, and inclusivity. You know, there are still big issues around the EV space with sort of petrol heads and others kind of coming in. It's great, it's fantastic to see. But is this going to meet the same levels of SAI? Certainly for charging, we're not seeing that at the moment in a lot of places. So they're the sort of standards that we want to insist, because that keeps London as accessible as we can be.
Now, I guess the most obvious point that we made here tonight is that the infrastructure is crucial. That's not a question, I suppose. It's screamingly obvious. I suppose the real issue is how that accessibility is rolled out to the general public, because you look at the facilities available in London and then compare it to rural areas, and it's night and day. How can we make the rollout efficient to make sure no one is left behind?
I definitely don't think people should always copy urban areas, particularly when you've got that disparity, because there was a huge assumption years ago that 50% of people could charge at home. Well, it's more like 25% in reality. That was a desk-based study using data and satellite imagery to say, oh, you've got a driveway, you'll be able to charge at home. Simply not the case. And of course, a lot of these places are rural, but you'll find the importance rests on community hubs. So making sure that you're utilising land that otherwise doesn't get the attention it deserves, the leisure centre, supermarket, car park, if that's already got charging available, encouraging the community to think about utilising that as their recharge station, or the way that the rapid chargers across the country are expanding with our sort of what we call CPOs, charge point operators. They're giving drivers faith that even if they can't charge at home or charge at work, they will be able to charge on the go. As we heard earlier about that amazing car innovation, 100 kilometres will become the norm. But beyond that, it stems back to behaviour. So feeling assured that you can make the switch to EV because you've seen other people do it. You've seen technology out there that inspires inspires you, but also is functional for your life. And I think it's really important not to lose sight of the person as we design our infrastructure. What's a nice environment to be in? Where can you go easily? And will it cost the earth? It shouldn't. So there's a really unfortunate disparity between how much it costs to charge at home versus in the public realm. And that's all to do with VAT and energy prices. I get it, but Joe Public doesn't care. They just don't understand. And I think that's a real shame. That's a big gap that we need to close.
Well, I suppose, Alex, there's very different challenges in urban areas. Not everyone has a driveway. How do we go about making sure that people in urban areas who might not have that kind of access also have the opportunity to tap into that kind of network?
Yeah, so, and the fact that just got mentioned, I mean, in London it is about 73% or so don't have access, don't have a driveway, so it's a huge part of that. Sarah just touched on something actually, which I think is really relevant to this, which is ultimately that kind of shared infrastructure piece. You still do not see this around the country. For those that are involved in EV charging, I'd encourage everyone to try and get that shared use of infrastructure. You know, car parks are a classic case where they sweat really hard in the day and then nothing at night. So there's got to be a lot better use of assets in this country because, you know, you can't make more land. So we're going to have to do a lot better at that and then utilise that land for multimodality, multi-mobility as well. I think that's key. Within the urban environment, I mean, obviously there are loads of fantastic initiatives, certainly in this room alone, for how you combine better residential charging on street and the like. You know, from a TfL perspective, we're hugely behind rapid charging hubs. We'd go for fewer, larger hubs. In a rural environment, it's slightly different, and of course, subsidies may be needed. I mean, we've done a lot of modelling around this. In urban areas, charging stacks up, it makes money. In rural areas, there's a question, maybe some support is needed from local authority, from central government, maybe from a private sector provider that can channel some of the cash flow that comes from an urban environment into the rural. So there's scope to do all of that as well. But we're certainly, you know, we're a big fan of charging hubs. But I think to follow on from what Sarah was saying, what's key is that we utilise those charging hubs to be a lot more than just charging. So they combine with logistics, at the top end, HGVs, kind of step-down facilities, all the way through to micromobility. They provide a community service. They do a lot more than perhaps what people have historically thought of as charging hubs, which is just kind of 6 people coming up, charging, getting on their way. So there's a lot more we can do with that. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, just to say, I think people aren't there yet. They're not aware of it yet. We haven't hit the point yet where people are struggling to charge publicly or in destinations. So I was on a late call last night with a council about how they could encourage fleet operators to access those underutilised car parks that have already had charging fitted, you know, slower AC overnight stuff. And that just takes away a lot of the pain, but it has to be done through clever apps and enablement and feeling secure that your vehicle is going to be safe overnight. And that's going to take time.
Okay, we'll get to questions in the room in just a moment, but they are coming in thick and fast online from our virtual audience. And we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. Let's do them quick fire. So, does Transport for London have a strategy for recycling end-of-life batteries?
Not an official strategy. I mean, but there's a whole team of people that look at this, and one sort of person that's pretty much dedicated to these sort of challenges. So no, not a full strategy, but I think that will come. But I don't think it'll be a London strategy. I think that'll be much broader than that when we have better schemes in this country. Not as quick fire as it should have been. Next one will be faster.
Okay, I'm managing 30 EV chargers and want to welcome cars from all over Europe. How can I receive easily the payments of thousands of card publishers? So I guess that's how we try and make that experience frictionless, I suppose. So I'll leave that, Sarah.
It's about procuring a good partner, like the first question you opened with. Find someone that's flexible, that takes multiple payment options and also makes it good for the end user, so you just turn up, QR code it, and you're in.
Okay. How can we get around the infrastructure limits for DC chargers within the city?
Do you think it's a grid connection question?
I think it might be.
Well, DC charging or rapid charging requires a very large amount of power, but it's about putting the right kit in the right place. So finding somewhere, a site that already has that power enablement, or be on the roadmap for getting your upgrade done in good time.
Okay, we're seeing some themes to some of these. How do you see business-to-business electrification and mobility hubs designed for these last-mile VUC enter the city centre? Hang on, let me try and let's get through that. So,
that's easy.
Yeah.
So that's about micro that's about consolidation of fleet. So when
Yes.
you, instead of having lots of vehicles moving around, but that's really interesting, London versus everywhere else appetite. So London wants to have bigger, fewer vehicles, and the rest of the country seems to be fixated on lots of little ones, so really harnessing micro-mobility. But you have to do it in a consolidation way, so a larger thing puts it into smaller things, and the smaller things go around and cause less congestion.
Okay, let's go to the room, as we still have more questions coming in online. Do we have any questions in the room for our guests?
Quick-fire answers coming up.
We have one over here. I am coming to you.
Thank you. So, Mark Constable, Head of Marketing and Public Affairs for Trojan Energy. So, obviously the ULEZ expansion is a key issue du jour in these parts at the moment. And there has been a bit of a blue council kind of coalition. So Hillingdon, Harrow, Bexley, Bromley, Surrey now come out today. How do we remove the partisan nature of some of these discussions? How can we get round them? And I realise it's a really kind of loaded question because I've thought about it and I can't think of how to do it. So I just wondered if the panel had any view on how to remove the kind of big P political aspects out of these kind of discussions.
If ever there's a question that doesn't have a quick-fire answer, I think I can also solve the Democrat-Republican issues and the state of UK politics just in a couple of sentences.
Could you do the chicken and egg one as well whilst you're at it?
I mean, all I would say, obviously I can't quite solve that and I'm not going to get drawn into ULEZ because that's way too feisty, especially with a camera there, is that when I talk to the boroughs, which as you know we talk to a lot, in fact today we spent our day going through all the boroughs, there's actually no real blue-red divide, and it's often the boroughs that you wouldn't expect, let's say, are the most interested in this. So I'm not sure when you get down to the level of the people actually working there, as ever, the people that work and get on with their jobs, like in the civil service or whatever, don't really have that much of a divide. They just want to do the right thing. When councillors and others get involved, you know, it gets a little bit different. He's playing with the traffic lights here now. So I don't think that's that big a disparity. I really don't. I think the people mostly want to get this done. People want to see charging. They want to get it delivered. So I don't think the blue-red thing will have that as big an impact as people think.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions from the room? Here we go.
Thank you. Hi, Alex. Ian Plummer, Auto Trader. Just a quick question on the hubs, which I think is a great concept. How many? How many, like in Greater London or per borough? What's the vision? I don't mean like tomorrow, but what's the vision?
Okay, so quick maths. Let's rattle through this. So London needs about 3,000 to 5,000 rapids. Now, a couple of those 1,000 rapids or so will come in through single points, as they're being now. There's about 700 rapids now. So we're looking, if you take the remainder of that, a couple of thousand may be needed. Hubs, on average, 10. 100 hubs, eventually building to 200 hubs. So somewhere in the 2030s, we should by then have the sort of 100 to 200 hubs that we need. Take that, let's call it 30 boroughs to keep the math simple. So roughly speaking, you've got sort of 3 to 4 in each. Obviously, the closer to central London, probably the fewer. Outer London boroughs might end up with something like 5 each.
Okay, we'll take another question from the online audience. Do you think time of use / off-peak pricing is a good way to manage charging demand?
I certainly do, but there's bigger benefits than just the price. It's about taking the load off in the local areas. Everyone always thinks the grid can't cope, but it's the local grids that struggle. So if you can encourage people to charge in line with when the grid is cleaner, cheaper, then great. But that does boil down to our question earlier about whether or not you can make use of it, whether you can have a flexible tariff. And I think choosing an app-based partner who can allow you to harness that cheaper energy and do flexible pricing on the tariff, clearly available to the person using it, then of course it will. I think people will really appreciate that incentive to charge cheaper when it's cleaner and greener.
Because this is part of the problem at the moment. There are so many different organisations with different approaches. Is there going to need to be a time where there almost needs to be a uniform approach to all of this to make things straightforward and frictionless for the EV driver?
I just think people are afraid of apps, but actually as consumers we choose our favourite things, so we choose our favourite apps. So it's actually a game of being the best one on the market, the most flexible, the easier to access. That's, I think, where we're going to see. I would actually be worried about making everybody be uniform and monopoly, because you're not going to suit everybody. You've got to mention Apple versus Android, and then a war breaks out.
Let's not get into that right now. We've only got 3 minutes left.
Exactly. So I think it's about allowing the consumer to make the choice. That's what a consumer does. It consumes its favourite thing. So
I mean, I'll throw into that again. There's going to be natural consolidation, as I said earlier, right? There will not be as many charge point operators as there are now. That's inevitable. So, you know, from a TfL perspective, in some ways, yeah, it'd be fantastic if we could control the whole thing, but we don't do monopolies. That's not what we're about. So, however many, go back to Ian's question, you know, the fact is, even if TfL built 100 hubs, there'll be loads of others, and they'll be from other providers. The main thing is we hold them to the right standards, and everyone demands the highest standards of the industry, and you keep the levels up here. That's the key thing, and then there will be consolidation, but hopefully people are striving with the highest standards and we don't ever kind of debase that.
We are flying through these questions. Do we have any more in the room? We've still got a couple of moments left. If not, oh, yeah. Doing this job better than I am. Here you go.
Sorry, I also work for TfL. Could I ask Sarah, the answer, you seem to be implying that a lot of the answer would come from fleet drivers, the B2B side as the consumer of these hubs. Is that where we should be directing government strategy to do the fleets first and private would follow? Or would you think it should be the other way around?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I do strongly believe that the sort of private consumer is very well catered for. There's lots of rapid charges. You can do contactless, but what's really missing is the ability to download VAT receipts or to reconcile that expense that you've had as a private driver versus a fleet driver. Not to mention the sheer volume of fleet that's going to be required to change their vehicles in a very short time frame. So I really think we need to be putting our best fleet forward.
Well, I saw what you did there. That was amazing. But is there really a problem with the software, do you think, at the moment? Isn't just contactless payment the answer?
Yeah, well, contactless works really, really well, right? You churn up, you pay, and off you go. But if you are driving for work or business and need to keep track of what you're spending and claim that back, then no, it's a nightmare. Find me a fleet driver who can be bothered to log on to a website, remember where it was that they were charging, what time it was, download the VAT receipt, get it PDF'd and sent off to their expensive claim process. They're not going to do that. Fuel cards get you somewhere towards that, but I really think it's important to offer all types of payment. And if you are a fleet user, to be able to claim your VAT, that's the fundamental piece.
Okay, got time for one more question from the room, if anyone else has any. If anyone is hiding behind me. No? Oh, over there at the back.
Hello, Toby Hiles from Grid Smarter Cities. We have an app that allows freight servicing and delivery vehicles to pre-book the curbside, so they can know when there's going to turn up to a charger, know it's going to be available, and know they can book it. I just wondered, obviously it's not the hub model you're going for. I just wonder whether TfL would be interested in exploring that option.
I think I may have to say yes, get in touch. But obviously that all sounds great. The point is there's room here for every possible solution, right? I mean, clearly we all know that this is a complicated space. There's never going to be one type, one charger, one winner. All of these ideas are brilliant, right? I mean, you go to these events now, there's obviously plenty of EV events, I'm sure we're all at them. The startup zones are just heaving, and you walk down them and almost everyone, you're like, that's a good idea, that's clever, and thought of that. Like, they're brilliant. So, I mean, the more of these ideas, the better, and it's just gonna, ultimately it all comes into the mix.
Okay. We've got through a tremendous number of questions. That was quickfire.
We did promise you.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. Well, that is, we'll wrap there, because I know the networking break is always important to people, and if you cut into people's networking breaks, they tend to get a bit emotional. So I will wrap things up there. Let's say a big thank you to Alex and to Sarah.
Cheers, guys.